ألا من كنت مولاه فهذا علي مولاه، اللهم وال من والاه وعاد من عاداه.
I was born into a family of 13.
13, wow.
Yes. And I'm the youngest. I was the baby.
Wow.
And the only one that so far has been blessed with Islam. My father was a very religious man, but he never attended church. And I think that from my recollection, he did not subscribe to the divinity of Jesus. But he taught us from the Psalms.
Okay.
Yes, and so we would get up in the morning, get up before the sun rose, and we would pray. So that was my beginning for the most part. My mother was a very loving, a very kind person. My father called her a genius, and my brothers and everybody, because she did everything. She never worked outside of the family, but she made everything from hat to shoes.
Really?
Yes, she did.
Wow.
Yes, and I never heard them. I never heard them quarrel. I never heard my parents quarrel with each other. And so I went to school, to Diego Martin Secondary in Trinidad and Tobago, and I had a wonderful childhood. I pray for my parents and, you know, my siblings, because we are still extremely close. Because, you know, although my mother, because my father had passed when I embraced Islam, but my mother was alive, and she told me that, and I knew it was a threat to try to force me into not becoming Muslim, but she told me that I would have to leave.
Home?
Yeah, home, yes. Yes, if I did become Muslim. And I did leave. But the parting, we hugged each other and cried, you know, in each other's arms, and I never stopped going to visit. Yes, I never stopped going to visit. And one of the highlights of my life, you know, was when, after some years of being Muslim, just before she died, she told me that I was an even better daughter. Yes, subhanAllah, after becoming, you know, Muslim. When I was around 18, I started searching.
Okay.
And I left the church that I was attending at the time. And I guess because I saw, you know, some hypocrisy, but for the most part, you know, there was this, you know, nagging sense that, you know, this was not it. And so I started visiting churches. I started visiting temples, Hindu temples.
In Trinidad?
In Trinidad, yes. I joined a group of people who were inclined to yoga, right? Raja yoga. And so I was even, you know, near to an ashram, and got into a group of people who, you know, we were just, I think as young people, we were just searching. And I used to sing. And on an occasion, I was invited to sing at this penthouse. And I did go, and I started singing. And I looked at the audience, most of whom had alcohol, and, you know, and I saw the cigarette smoke coming up to almost, you know, shroud me. And at that point, I think that was the turning point for me, because I said, this is not for me. On the stage, I'm singing my heart out, and, you know, I said, this is not for me. And the day that I remembered, letting them know, look, this would be my last. This was my first performance, but it would also be my last. That was when I had an introduction into Islam. And it was my husband whom I had, he was working at the same company. And I never noticed him before. However, it came to me because I was personal assistant at Lever Brothers at the time. And this young man was taking his time to pray. And one of the supervisors was against this. So it came, the complaint came on my desk. And when I, interviewed him, he said, well, I'm sorry, but, people take their time to smoke. People take their time to do all sorts of things. I'm taking my 15-minute break to say my prayers. And that was my introduction, to Islam. And he was very shy, so he just kept putting, we had the conversation was very, very little, because he would just put books for me and left notes. And he would, I would question, I would read the books, because I love reading, always loved reading. And I would read the books and I would question. So for 2 years, I investigated Islam. And then I wrote him a letter saying that he had confused my well-ordered life. He had, but by that time I was convinced, and I did embrace, I did take my Shahada, but I am telling you now that I had a dream. And I can't remember if it was before or after that situation in the penthouse where I sang. But it was the same dream I had 3 times in a row.
Okay.
All right? And it was the most beautiful place that I had ever envisaged, And I had never seen, I had never seen anything like it, in any of my travels. And I forgot the dream. I forgot the dream until I went to Tobago and I took my Shahada. When I took my Shahada, the surah that was read to me was Surah Rahman. And as soon as the words of Surah Rahman were recited to me, I remembered the dream.
Wow.
I remembered the dream because it was exactly as, the words described heaven. Yes, it was a dream about streams flowing and green herbage, and a wonderful place. As I said, and the thing is, what I remember the dream because as I said, I had it 3 times in a row. I had 3 occasions and it was the exact same thing. I was reaching, I saw this person, and this person was all in white, looked male, but I never saw the person's face. And I was going towards that person. But I had to cross a stream, a beautiful stream, where you could see the bottom, you could see the bottom of the stream. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And when the words of Surah Rahman were read to me, Allah most gracious, He created man, taught him speech and intelligence. The sun and the moon follow courses exactly computed, and the birds and the trees, as it goes on. And which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? The refrain. And I knew that Allah had indeed guided me. There were brothers in Tobago, and as I was, when I got married, I moved to Tobago for a while. Okay. Yes, and so I took my Shahada there. Yes, because I was not well, I didn't live at home anymore. One of my sisters who was she worked with the High Commission in Jamaica, so she was in Jamaica at the time, and her letter kind of clinched it for me, because she wrote and she told me that my father had always wanted someone to learn the Arabic language.
Really?
Wanted one of his children to learn the Arabic language. And in other words, if he were alive, he would have blessed it. And that was all I needed to hear. That was all I needed to hear. From the little I knew of him, I knew that he was into, he had read the Gospel of Barnabas.
Which is not included
Yes,
in the Bible.
which is not included in the Bible. Not only that, I think that he used to teach my siblings the Our Father in Swahili.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And so he was, one would say that he was way ahead of his time. I remembered he would take us out and he would let us look at the ants, and he would tell us that they were our best teachers.
The ants.
The ants.
The ants were your best teachers.
Yes, and that we could learn so much from them, and we had to observe them, the way they got together and they stuck together, and the teamwork, the strength, in one ant in terms of our comparative weight and things like that. So he was a wonderful man. Wonderful man, yes. Wonderful man. May Allah have mercy on him. They were very good years for me. My test, I think, was that I came from a very happy home, and when I got into Islam, what I saw in the community was just the opposite. And I think there, that was where my test was, because I had never seen my parents have an argument, for instance, and but yet, this new community was always evolving. Then there was always confusion and fitna, in the groups and so on. The married couples either breaking up or something like that. And so for me, I'm saying, is this Islam? Is this, what I'm reading about? And it didn't make sense. Then I started reading a lot of the books, written by the Shia scholars, and I found that the treatment of women was, to say the least, oppressive. And I can't remember who gave me the Balaghah, but I was blessed with the Balaghah. And I read it in its entirety. And then my husband gave my son that as a gift when he was about 7. But during that time, there was the revolution in Iran. So we were hearing, news about Imam Khomeini. We were looking at, what he was doing, and, it was amazing. And, people started asking, and I said, it makes so much sense. When I realized, I said, but this Islam, there are different schools of thought, and that, at this juncture, I was required to choose between the Shia school of thought and the Sunni school of thought. And I was having my second child at that time. This was in the 80s. And I remembered that when I was reading, somebody was asking, I said, but if, my question to myself in making a decision was, if you wanted to know about me, if someone wanted to know about me, who would they ask? They would ask my immediate relatives. They would not ask somebody who didn't live with me. You know, if somebody wanted to investigate, you know, my character, they would ask, you know. And I'm saying, you know, when I read through and I read, you know, the eloquence with which this particular book was written, I was convinced, and I said, you know, who can know the Prophet, peace be upon him, better than one who lived with him? And so it has not, you know, it has not changed. I have not, in fact, I hope and, you know, I pray that I'm closer to, you know, Ahlul Bayt, to the family of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon them, now than I ever was. We both studied together. Yes, we both studied together. I had a school in my house.
Okay.
Yes, and you know, several of those children, several of my children, I call them all my children, several of them are now, you know, having children themselves, and so it was, yeah, we started this small community that started. My husband and a few other brothers were the first members, you know, to embrace the Shia school of thought in that part of the world. So much so we called our daughter, we named our daughter Clarity of Faith. And I could have probably done that. However, I don't know if it was the fact that I have always been grounded, you know, in terms of my faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has always been very deep and very personal. So that although my husband and we got a divorce and so on, you know, I tell people all the time that I would pray for him 5 times, as often as I pray for anyone, because he was the instrument that Allah used to bring me to this beautiful deen. And I am, you know, when you said yesterday that you were indebted, that's how I feel about him. I was indebted. However, when I remember when I had my first argument, I reached home by my mother and I said, Mommy, what, you know, I never saw you and Daddy quarrel, you know. And she said, yes, we did have our arguments, but we agreed that we would have it behind closed doors. And my father would always, you know, around the table, he would always say a prayer, you know, and he would always ask the Creator to bless my mother for the food that she had made and so on. So it was, so coming from that, I realized that it was about, you know, what you present and what you glean from this. But I have come to, you know, even greater faith, and I know that it is up to us. It is up to us to decide, you know, what we want from this deen, you know, and I feel convinced that unity, you know, of faith and love for one's brother and sister is the vehicle that would take us there. And in terms of our racial divide, in terms of, you know, the language divide, you know, when it boils down to it, Allah has given us such a beautiful deen that we all say salam. We all say, may the peace of Allah be with you. You know, and I was telling someone recently, you know, we are the only group that greets people with a prayer. Because it is indeed a prayer.
Sure.
Yes, we pray for, you know, we pray for our brothers and sisters all the time.
Yes.
You know, and I thank Allah, and I ask Allah to bless my husband and every Muslim that I have met, because they have all been instrumental in the journey towards, you know, peace, where I feel happy and pleased to be a Muslim, but not just a Muslim, but a follower of Ahlul Bayt. We had problems. There were problems. But Trinidad, and Trinidad is unique in that with indentureship, with slavery, there was always a mix. And there was always a sense of underlying respect for people of other faiths. And so too, though there was very little contact, but we would still keep, touch with our Sunni brothers and sisters, because Trinidad has a very strong interfaith movement, very, very strong, and they get together very, very often to discuss, religious problems and so on. I have not been there for about 5 years, but I'm hoping that it's even stronger now. But I don't know, how strong it is anymore. But we couldn't pray with a turbat. We couldn't go into the mosques and pray with on this piece of stone and so on and things like that. We couldn't do that, and so we set up our own little private movement, as it were, and we started growing from there. We got a visiting Maulana, and he taught us, a lot about, a lot of things we were doing incorrectly. And, may Allah bless him, he taught us well, and yes, and got us together, yes. And I want to boast that we can boast of one of the first set of halal stores, chain of stores, in Trinidad, because we had Royal Castle where only halal meat is being used, Kentucky, halal meat, the Chinese stores, the Chinese, we have, all of those. And, because people demanded it, Muslims, who want to go out, and so there was a movement towards that inclusion, as it were. And I still maintain extremely good relationships with my Sunni brothers and sisters. And we do have, I started a women's group, and we would come together every year. I don't know if it still happens, but we would meet and we would discuss, our common problems and so on, and talk about plans to solve them. We started, a sort of credit union type savings plan there, and things. So we have always maintained very good relations with our Sunni brothers, and it's a credit to us as a people, I think, that we have not, and as I said, the intermarriage continues. Yes, till today. When I left, because I taught, I homeschooled my children for the first years.
Wow.
Yes, it was a wonderful experience. My one regret is that I didn't do it until they were older. But I homeschooled my children up to when my last son was 5 years, and then I went back into teaching, and I started, mainstream school, and I taught at public school. And this was just after the coup in Trinidad. I don't know if you know about it, but there was an attempted coup in Trinidad, and I applied the year, it was that very year I think I applied, and I started working the very next year. This was in 1990, and I taught for quite a number of years. My husband was back and forth because he used to do sales, so he would come to the United States and shop and so on. And I went to college, I went to Teachers College, And what happened? He remarried, and things went well. Things went well. I think that for the most part, because I have maintained excellent relations with everyone, including my husband, including my, my co-wives. We talk all the time. We are still, and I think they love Islam. They love Ahlul Bayt, and for me, that's the common element. And but I think that for the most part, and I want to say honestly, when we as women fail to obey our husbands, fail to see and to give them the authority that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them, there will be problems. And in all honesty, I blame myself, my nafs, for the separation. I can only be honest, and but as I said, it has been a wonderful experience. Yes. We as a Muslim family, we always pray together. This was in the initial stages, and my husband migrated to the United States before I did, because I was teaching at the time, and I think if anything, that was where there was a separation, because there was a physical separation. It put a strain on the relationship, but my children are all, alhamdulillah, very close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and love Ahlul Bayt. And so they do practice. My son, I have 2 grandchildren. Yes, I just recently had a granddaughter, Aliyah. Thank you very much. And they're all striving and struggling. It is not easy. It has not been for any one of us, but I think that for the most part, we depend on Allah, and we know that Allah can do anything. Sure. And I pray that, I pray, as I say, for all my children, because I claim so many. I claim so many. All the children that I have had an impact in their lives and so on, they all have children, and from time to time I would give them my 2 bits. But I tend to just I try to quote Quran, and also send them a prayer from Imam Zainul Abidin. Yeah, because I don't know how to get through any other way. Yes, but for the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His mercy. When I got to Philadelphia, I started doing substitute teaching there. And one of the things that I had to do in Philadelphia, and I kept doing it all the time and still do, is that a lot of children, there were so many Nasirs and Husseins and Hassans, and they did not have a clue about Islam. They didn't know what their names meant, and I was happy to see all the hijabs, but then on further investigation, you see the hijabs, but you hear the undesirable things that came out of those hijabis' mouths, and And I do take the opportunity to speak to them whenever I can, and to kind of give them. But as I say, the dawah that has to be given in Philadelphia is one of education in terms of how special they are, because I don't think that as a people they understand how precious they are in Allah's sight. And this is throughout the diaspora. There is a sense of, there's no pride in who they are. And you see it in the way they dress, the way they want to look like other people, and it's almost as though they are ashamed to be who they were created to be. And that is my sadness for us as a people. And so what I do when I go and I teach, every opportunity that I get, I show the children pictures of Timbuktu, for instance, before the slaves came to this part of the world, and tell them about, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, and the fact that he had, so many students, and the universities that were in Timbuktu, and, give them a piece of their history so that they can be proud, because I think they need that for their very survival today, because they do not believe in themselves, and if you do not believe in yourself, you cannot love the products, you can't love your children, because if you can't love yourself and you can't recognize yourself as being special in Allah's sight, then, so I try to reach out to all, I don't care who they are, but yes, tell all the children, and indeed all of them, that once you were created, you are unique and wonderfully made.
Sure.
Yes, and that is my message to them. And for me, that's the sadness of Philadelphia. There is one community, it's an Iranian community that I go to, and I must say that I have been accepted with open arms. They do speak Farsi, but my context is, and the way, a lot of people would complain, oh, they don't speak English. But the community of itself is made up of a lot of senior citizens. And so, from my perspective as a teacher, again, I'm saying, why should these people come and have to strain their ears to understand English because a few visitors want to come? Yes. So that, but they do have, they have every month, they have an English speaker, but I try to go every week, once I'm there, for Dua Kumail, but they do not have Juma, because the person that they employ, the Hujjatul Islam that they employ is, he has to work somewhere else, so that the community is not big enough for them to have, to pay him for that collective Juma. So what we do is Dua Kumail, but that's it. That's about it for Philadelphia proper.